The Oakmont subdivision hummed with the specific silence of afternoon, the kind that came after school let out but before dinner time, when most families were contained in their homes like exhibits behind glass. Corinne Whitmore stood at her kitchen window, observing her pool like a curator surveying a priceless installation. The water was perfect. Crystal clear, chlorinated to pharmaceutical precision, the pH balanced to decimals that would have impressed a chemist. She'd spent the morning testing it with the same ritualistic care some people reserved for meditation. This was her meditation. This was her control. At 43, Corinne had perfected the architecture of her life the way most people only dreamed about. The house was a 1998 colonial she'd renovated twice, once when she bought it, once when divorce made her recalibrate her existence. The pool had been phase 2 of that recalibration. $28,000, installed 3 summers ago, and it had become the physical manifestation of everything she'd rebuilt, pristine, managed, belonging entirely to her. She didn't use it much, actually. The irony wasn't lost on her. Corinne had constructed the perfect pool for a woman who mostly liked to stand at her kitchen window and admire it, the shape of her life in crystalline water. Her daughter Emma was 16 and preferred her phone to the outdoors. Her ex-husband paid support and visited inconsistently. Her job in pharmaceutical sales kept her busy and lucrative. Corinne had arranged everything into a system that worked, and that system required order. The window was spotless. She'd cleaned it that morning, too. From her vantage point, she could see 3 other houses. The Keeners to the left. Their yard was always chaos, toys scattered like archaeological evidence of childhood. The Patels across the street maintained their lawn, but Corinne could see the rust on their grill from here. And then the Hendersons' place, where she could currently see Mrs. Henderson hanging laundry in that chaotic way she had, not using proper clips. Corinne turned away from the window. She had a Zoom call with the Denver office in 20 minutes. She needed to review her queue for projections. The boy's name was Derek Henderson, and he was 12 years old, existing at that specific age where consequences hadn't yet caught up to impulse. He lived across the street in a house that seemed to actively resist organization. His mother worked part-time at the library. His father managed a hardware store. They had 3 kids, 2 dogs, and an attitude about childhood that Corinne found bewildering. They let their kids play, outside, without scheduled activities, like animals. Derek was in that particular mood that Thursday afternoon that all 12-year-old boys experience. Invincible, bored, and catastrophically stupid. His older sister Maya had left a bucket of acrylic paint in the garage. Navy blue, royal purple, and metallic silver, colors she was experimenting with for an art project. Derek had found them because he was looking for something to do, which was the root cause of probably 60% of human disasters. He'd been playing a game with his friend Lucas, a game that didn't have a name, just a structure. The structure was, dare Lucas to do increasingly stupid things, then dare Derek to do the same, escalating until one of them actually got hurt or caught. Lucas had just been dared to throw a tennis ball at the Hendersons' roof. Derek had caught it. They were both feeling creative and stupid. "I dare you to dump something weird into the Whitmore pool," Lucas had said, already grinning because he knew Derek would do it. Derek had looked across the street at that perfect blue rectangle. It was the kind of pool that made you understand why Corinne Whitmore never actually used it. It was too intimidating, too perfect. The kind of thing that existed to be ruined. "The paint bucket," Derek had said, the idea arriving fully formed, and Lucas had already started laughing. They discussed logistics for maybe 90 seconds. Derek would slip across the street. The Whitmore's gate was always open. Mrs. Whitmore was inside. They could hear the faint vibration of music from her kitchen. Emma was at her friend's house. It was a window of maybe 7 minutes where the pool existed in an unguarded state. Derek grabbed the paint bucket, all 3 colors mixed together in his mind as one magnificent act of chaos. His heart was hammering in that way that felt like excitement and terror at the same time. He was already imagining how amazing it would be to have this story, to have done this, to have proved that the perfect things weren't actually untouchable. He cut through the backyards with the bucket, keeping low like he was in a movie. He didn't notice that Mrs. Whitmore had finished her call early. He didn't notice that she'd gone to the window to check on the pool, a habit, a compulsion, a moment of checking something that didn't need checking. He just saw the water, saw his opportunity, and poured. Corinne was mid-sentence in her email to the Denver office when something in her peripheral vision made her freeze. She was sitting at her kitchen table, laptop open, and something had moved across her pool view. A figure. Her brain caught it without her conscious mind registering it yet. She looked up. What she saw in that moment would organize the rest of her life into before and after. A boy, some kid from the neighborhood, she recognized him vaguely as one of the Henderson children, was standing at her pool's edge, holding a bucket that was tilting, and the contents of that bucket were cascading into her water in a slow-motion nightmare of deep, violent purple. Corinne's body moved before her mind caught up. She was standing. She was moving. She was crossing the kitchen in 4 strides, then the living room, then the sliding door, which she shoved open hard enough that it rattled in its track. "Hey," she shouted, but the word was already too late. The bucket was mostly empty. The pool was mostly purple. Derek turned at the sound of her voice. For one eternal second, they locked eyes, the boy's face cycling through emotions like a broken slot machine. Surprise, fear, and then something that looked almost like exhilaration the moment before consequences arrived to collect their debt. He dropped the bucket. It clattered on the concrete. Corinne didn't run. She walked across the lawn with a precision that was somehow more terrifying than rage. When she reached Derek, she looked at the bucket, then at the pool, then back at the bucket. The remnants of paint still dripped from its interior, 3 colors mixing with the residue of his act. "What," she said, and her voice was very quiet now, "did you do?" Derek's mouth opened. No words came out. Behind them, the pool swirled with color, the paint dispersing in slow clouds that looked almost beautiful if you didn't understand what you were looking at, if you didn't know that something precious was being destroyed. Corinne made a sound then. Not quite a scream, not quite a laugh, something that lived in the space between sanity and its opposite. She sank to her knees at the pool's edge, staring at the water like it had betrayed her personally. The sound of her breaking seemed to echo across the entire neighborhood. Lights came on in other houses, curtains twitched. And Derek Henderson stood frozen, holding an empty paint bucket, understanding with the sort of clarity that only comes to children in moments like this. He had done something that couldn't be undone. He had crossed a line that had very real consequences. The perfect prison was no longer perfect. And everything that came next would be because of this moment, because of purple paint in crystal water, because of a boy who thought consequences only happened to other people. Because Corinne Whitmore, on her knees at the edge of her destroyed pool, was thinking thoughts that were already beginning to calcify into actions. Corinne didn't remember calling 911, but the police reports would later show that she had. The dispatcher transcript would become evidence in what the neighborhood would eventually call the pool incident. Though to Corinne it would always be simply THE incident, the moment when everything changed. She remained on her knees for 13 minutes before Officer Patricia Reeves arrived. Derek had run, back across the lawns, back to his house, where his mother Linda would watch her son arrive soaked in his own panic and ask the question all parents ask. What happened? What had happened was that the water had stopped moving. The paint had begun to settle. The beautiful geometric clarity that had defined Corinne's pool was now a murky soup of blue and purple, with silver flecks that caught the afternoon light like some malevolent art installation. Corinne didn't cry. That was what people would later find most disturbing about this moment, that she didn't cry. She knelt at the edge of the water, completely dry, she hadn't gone in, wouldn't go in, and she simply stared. Her hands hung at her sides. Her face was blank in a way that suggested the person inside had temporarily vacated the premises. Officer Reeves was young, maybe 30, and she was trying to piece together what constituted a crime here. Vandalism, property damage, the pool belonged to Corinne. Derek had dumped paint into it without permission. Those were facts. "Is this your pool?" Reeves asked, already knowing the answer. Corinne didn't respond at first, then, yes. "Do you want to press charges against the Henderson boy?" The question seemed to arrive from very far away. Corinne looked up at Officer Reeves with eyes that didn't seem to focus on anything in particular. "I want," Corinne said slowly, "to know why someone would do this. I want to understand the reason." Officer Reeves had responded to 247 calls in her career. She'd seen every variation of human chaos. She recognized the particular blank quality in Corinne's voice as dangerous, not violent, but something deeper. The voice of someone whose internal architecture had just been substantially damaged. Kids do thoughtless things, Reeves said, and it sounded inadequate even to her. It's property damage. We can file a report. The family may be liable for damages. But Karen wasn't really listening anymore. She was thinking about the pool, about what it had cost. Not the money. Money was replaceable, and Karen had money. She was thinking about what it represented, what it had meant. A woman rebuilds her life after divorce. She takes control. She creates order. She builds something beautiful. And then a child, for no reason more complex than boredom, destroys it. There was a metaphor in there somewhere, Karen thought distantly. A message from the universe about the futility of control. The universe was so heavy-handed sometimes. Derek's parents arrived at the pool 45 minutes later. Linda Henderson was a woman in her mid-40s who wore her chaos like a badge of honor. Her yard reflected this. Her parenting philosophy reflected this. Her face, when she saw what her son had done, reflected this. Not shock exactly, but a specific kind of resignation. Derek, she said, and it was less a name and more a sigh. Mark Henderson, Derek's father, looked at the pool and then at his wife and then at his son. "How much is this going to cost us?" he asked, the most important question any parent could ask in that moment. Karen had been sitting in a lawn chair while Officer Reeves filled out paperwork. She looked like someone who had been drained of vitality. She was still wearing the clothes she'd been wearing for her Zoom call. Blouse, slacks, the uniform of professional women who'd been caught in their home office when chaos arrived. "The pool cost $28,000, Karen said. She wasn't looking at Mark. She was looking at Derek. "The water needs to be completely drained and refilled. The pool interior may be damaged. I'll need to have a technician assess it. My estimate is that this will cost between $5,000 and $8,000 to correct." Mark Henderson's face went pale. $8,000 was not nothing. $8,000 was car repairs or a summer vacation or significant anxiety at his kitchen table. "We'll pay," he said immediately. "Whatever it costs, Derek, apologize." Derek looked at his shoes. His mother looked at Karen with an expression that was attempting to communicate something. Sympathy, maybe, or understanding, or perhaps just a desperate wish that they could all pretend this hadn't happened. "Derek," Mark said again, his voice taking on an edge. "Look at Mrs. Whitmore and apologize." Derek looked up. His eyes met Karen's, and in that moment, something passed between them that had nothing to do with paint or pools or the price of water. It was the moment when a child understands that his actions have consequences that extend beyond himself. That someone else is hurt. That hurt people, and it had to stop somewhere. "I'm sorry," Derek said, and he meant it. He absolutely meant it. "I didn't think." "No," Karen agreed quietly. "You didn't." That night, Karen sat in her living room with a glass of wine she didn't drink. She had Emma call from her friend's house to ask if she could stay for dinner. Karen said yes. She was grateful for the solitude, though gratitude wasn't quite the right word for what she felt. Gratitude implied capacity for positive feeling, and Karen seemed to have been emptied of that. She pulled up her laptop. She Googled pool repair costs. She looked at contractors' websites. She considered draining the pool herself and refilling it, which would take days and significant effort and wouldn't address whatever damage might have been done to the pool's interior. The paint might have clogged filters. It might stain. It might not come out at all. She found herself reading about pools, which was something she had avoided doing since the day she'd had it installed. The reading had felt like admitting that something she spent money on could break, could need maintenance, could require constant vigilance to maintain its perfection. At 9 p.m. her phone rang. Mark Henderson. "We want to make this right," he said without preamble. "I've checked with our insurance. We're covered for this type of damage. We can start the repair process immediately. We don't expect you to pay anything." Karen listened to his words. They were good words, responsible words, the words of a parent who was attempting to course-correct his child's behavior through economic restitution. "How old is Derek?" she asked. 12. He's a good kid, Mrs. Whitmore. He made a stupid choice, but—" "Yes," Karen said. "He made a stupid choice, and I'm going to make sure he understands the full weight of that choice." There was a silence on the line. She could hear Mark trying to understand what she meant, but she wasn't entirely sure herself. She just knew that this wasn't over, that apologies and insurance and contractors couldn't fix what had actually been broken. The next morning, Karen called a lawyer's office and asked to speak to someone about liability in cases of property damage. She was informed that she had several options. She could negotiate a settlement with the Henderson family. She could file suit in small claims court. She could pursue it in civil court if the damages exceeded $8,000, which they might, with legal fees included. It was the lawyer, a woman named Patricia Sullivan who specialized in property disputes, who asked the question that would redirect Corinne's entire response to this situation. "What do you actually want to achieve here?" Sullivan asked. "Do you want the money, do you want the pool fixed, or do you want something else?" Corinne realized she wasn't sure. The money didn't matter. The pool could be fixed. What she wanted was for someone to understand what had been taken from her. It wasn't the pool. The pool was just concrete and chemicals and filtered water. What had been taken was the narrative she'd constructed about her own control. The story she'd been telling herself about having built something that worked. "I want," Corinne said slowly, "to ensure that Derek Henderson thinks about this for the rest of his life. I want every time he sees a pool, every time he thinks about that afternoon, I want him to feel the weight of what he did." Attorney Sullivan was quiet for a moment. "That's not something the legal system can accomplish," she said finally. "That would be something you'd have to do yourself." After they hung up, Corinne sat with that. She would have to do it herself. She would have to be the one to make sure this moment didn't fade into the simple blur of childhood mischief that forgiving parents allowed their children to retreat into. She started researching. She found Derek's school. She found out his email address. She found out that he was in 7th grade at Lincoln Middle, that he played baseball, that he was a B student who could do better if he applied himself. By the time she finished, she had constructed a plan. It wasn't a legal plan. It wasn't something Attorney Sullivan would have advised. But Corinne had spent 43 years building her life on the principle that if you wanted something done right, you had to do it yourself. The pool remained purple for 3 more days while she waited for contractors. During those 3 days, she took photographs. She measured the exact shade of the water with a color chart. She documented the damage with the precision of someone constructing evidence. And then, on the 4th day, she made a decision that would ripple through the neighborhood like the purple paint through her pool. The lawsuit hit the neighborhood like a stone dropped into still water. By Monday morning, the day Mark Henderson received the legal paperwork, the news had already spread across 3 blocks of Oakmont through the most efficient communication system available to suburbia, group texts from other mothers. Corinne Whitmore had sued. Not negotiated, not settled, not accepted the insurance payment and moved on like a reasonable person. She had escalated to the level of lawyers and court dates and the official machinery of civil litigation, all for a pool and some paint and a 12-year-old's moment of stupidity. The neighborhood split almost immediately into factions, the way neighborhoods do when a situation becomes too complex for simple moral clarity. Some people sided with Mark Henderson, who was a decent guy who worked hard and had good intentions. Some people sided with Corinne, who had every legal right to pursue damages and shouldn't have to absorb costs for someone else's child's bad behavior. Most people were somewhere in the middle, uncomfortable with both extremes. Derek's baseball coach called him into his office the Tuesday after the lawsuit was filed. "Your parents mentioned something about a situation," Coach Hernandez said. He was a man in his 50s, the kind of coach who believed in hard work and consequences, but also in redemption. "I want to hear your side." Derek told him, the dare, the paint bucket, the moment when he'd looked into Mrs. Whitmore's eyes and understood that he'd broken something significant. Coach Hernandez listened without interrupting. "This is the moment," Hernandez said when Derek finished, "where your character is forged. This isn't just about a pool. It's about what kind of person you become when you're held accountable." Derek didn't feel particularly forged. He felt 12 years old and terrified. His parents were fighting more than they had been before the lawsuit. His father was stressed about money. His mother was defensive and angry, not at Derek, but at Corinne, at the situation, at the general unfairness of a woman who'd sue over something that could be fixed. "My advice," Hernandez continued, "is to face this directly, apologize sincerely. Do whatever you can to make restitution, not because a lawyer tells you to, but because it's the right thing, and let her see that you're serious about that." Derek nodded, but he was thinking about Mrs. Whitmore's face, about the way she'd looked at him when his father had told him to apologize, about the feeling that his apology hadn't been enough, that nothing would be enough. Corinne's lawyer, Patricia Sullivan, was confident about the case. $15,000 was a stretch for damages that would likely be covered by the first $8,000 in insurance and repairs, But the lawn care and pool access Karen would lose during the repair period could be argued as secondary damages. The case was solid. It might not win, but it had a chance. "The question," Sullivan said in a call to Karen, "is whether you want to negotiate before we go to trial. The Henderson family is offering to settle at $11,000. Karen felt a flash of something, irritation maybe, that they would think she could be bought off at any number, that this was about money. "No settlement," she said. "I want to go to trial." "Karen," Sullivan said, and it was the first time she'd used her first name instead of Mrs. Whitmore, which suggested she was moving into friend territory rather than pure professional territory. "I need to ask you something. What's this really about?" Karen was standing at her kitchen window looking at the pool. The water had been drained 3 days ago. The contractors had begun the process of power washing and assessment. It looked like a wound, a concrete cavity that should be filled with life but currently held only absence and the documentation of damage. "It's about," Karen said slowly, "a child who did something without thinking about consequences, and I want him to think about them." "He will," Sullivan said. "Whether we win or lose this case, he will. That moment at the pool edge, he's never going to forget that." "It's not enough," Karen said. "It's not enough that he feels bad. I want him to understand that actions matter, that you can't just destroy something beautiful and walk away from it." There was a long pause. "What happened?" Sullivan asked. "Not the pool, what actually happened?" And Karen found herself talking about the divorce, about rebuilding, about the pool as a symbol of control, of proof that she could create something perfect in a world that seemed determined to dismantle her. About the specific moment when she looked out her window and watched a child destroy it all as an afterthought. Sullivan listened. When Karen finished, Sullivan said, "You're not actually suing the Henderson family. You're suing the part of yourself that believed everything could be controlled if you just tried hard enough." Karen wanted to argue, but she couldn't, because Sullivan was right. The pool was just a pool. Derek was just a kid. But the breakdown of order, the destruction of control, the proof that vigilance wasn't enough, that was what she couldn't forgive. "I still want to go to trial," Karen said. The trial was set for 3 weeks out. In that time, Derek found himself in an unexpected form of purgatory. He continued going to school, playing baseball, existing in the physical world. But he was also living in the temporal space of the lawsuit. His parents had hired their own lawyer. There were depositions. There were phone calls with insurance adjusters. There was a quality to every day now where Derek understood he was being documented, measured, considered by the machinery of the legal system. He became obsessed with understanding Karen Whitmore. He started by watching her house, which seemed creepy even to him, but he couldn't help it. He'd walk home from school and slow down in front of her place, trying to understand what she did all day. He watched her working at her kitchen table. He watched her checking the pool contractor's work. He watched her standing at the pool's edge, looking at the repairs like they were a personal affront. One afternoon, he left a note in her mailbox. He'd written it 6 times before getting it right, each iteration feeling inadequate. "Mrs. Whitmore, I know sorry doesn't fix anything. I know you're suing my family. I don't understand why you can't just accept the insurance money and fix the pool. My dad says you're being unreasonable, but I think you're just sad. I think the pool meant something to you and I took that away. I'm 12 and I don't know how to make it right, but I want to try. What do you want me to do?" "Derek." Karen found the note on a Tuesday afternoon. She read it 3 times. The handwriting was childish, the paper a torn piece from a spiral notebook. It was genuine. It was also infuriating because it was exactly the kind of note that was supposed to make her soften, reconsider, accept the apology, and move on. She didn't soften. She called Sullivan. "Is it appropriate for the defendant to contact me before trial?" "He's a child," Sullivan said. "He's attempting to apologize. I don't care what it is. Instruct his lawyer that all further communication go through official channels." She didn't respond to the note. She filed it away in a folder with the photographs and the contractor's assessments and the legal documents. She added it to the narrative of a child who didn't understand that some things, once broken, stayed broken. The courtroom was smaller than Derek had expected. He'd watched enough television to imagine something grander, wood paneling and high ceilings, and a judge who looked like authority itself. Instead, the courthouse was a 1970s building with fluorescent lighting and a judge who was wearing reading glasses on a beaded chain, and seemed more tired than authoritative. Corinne sat on one side of the courtroom with her lawyer. Derek's family sat on the other. They didn't make eye contact. Derek's mother kept her hand on Derek's shoulder like she could transfer strength through touch. The judge's name was Judge Patricia Morales. She had been judging small claims and civil cases for 17 years. She'd seen enough of these disputes to understand their real architecture. They were rarely about the surface issue. The surface issue was just the vehicle the real conflict traveled in. Attorney Sullivan presented Corinne's case first. She submitted photographs of the pristine pool before the incident. She submitted photographs of the damaged pool after. She presented contractors' estimates for repairs. She established the reasonable timeline for recovery and the pool's unavailability during that time. She presented Derek's apology via his attorney, a form letter, essentially, which somehow made it worse. Then Derek's attorney, a man named Thomas Wu, presented his case. He argued that the damages had been substantially overstated. The pool had been repaired. The insurance had covered most of the cost. Derek was 12 years old. He had demonstrated remorse. He had agreed to community service as punishment for the vandalism. The suit was excessive and was, in Wu's opinion, designed more to punish the family than to compensate legitimate damages. Judge Morales asked questions. She asked Corinne about the pool, about its cost, about what she'd lost beyond the repair expenses. Corinne tried to explain about the principle of the thing, about teaching accountability, about the breakdown of order. Judge Morales listened, then she turned to Derek. "Young man," she said, "do you understand what you did?" Derek nodded. His voice, when it came, was quiet. "I dumped paint into Mrs. Whitmore's pool on a dare. It was stupid. I wasn't thinking about consequences. I was just thinking it would be funny." "And has it been funny?" Judge Morales asked. "No, ma'am," Derek said. "How has it been for you?" Derek glanced at his mother, then at his father, then back at the judge. "I don't like my family fighting," he said. "I don't like that people are mad at us. I don't like that I did something that made someone really sad, and I don't like that Mrs. Whitmore doesn't think I'm sorry, even though I am." Judge Morales nodded slowly. She set aside her papers for a moment and removed her glasses. Without them, she looked older and sadder. "Let me tell you what I see," she said, and she was speaking to the room, but really to Corinne. "I see a boy who made a bad decision. I see a family dealing with the consequences of that decision. I see another person who is dealing with her own consequences. And I see a situation that has escalated beyond the actual damage that occurred." She paused. She put her glasses back on. "The pool cost $28,000. It was damaged by paint and water. The repair cost was approximately $7,000. The insurance covered $6,000 of that. The remaining $1,000 and any incidental expenses are the responsibility of the defendant family. That is fair and that is reasonable." She looked directly at Corinne. "However, I'm concerned about something here. This lawsuit isn't actually about the pool. A pool is a material object. Material objects get damaged. Children are impulsive. Parents pay for their children's mistakes. That's the structure of responsibility. But you're suing for $15,000, which is more than double the actual damage, and the reason, I suspect, is that you're trying to make sure this child suffers enough to match your own suffering. That's not something a court can or should do." Corinne felt her chest tighten. "I'm ruling," Judge Morales continued, "that the defendant family is responsible for the full repair costs of $7,000, plus court costs and attorney's fees, bringing the total to approximately $9,000. That is a substantial consequence for a 12-year-old's moment of stupidity, and I believe it's appropriate." She banged her gavel, and the case was over. Corinne had won, technically, but it felt like a loss. She'd wanted $15,000. She'd wanted the suit to drag out. She'd wanted Derek to suffer through the legal process the way she was suffering through the breakdown of her carefully constructed world. Instead, she'd won $9,000, and the knowledge that a judge thought she was acting unreasonably. Outside the courthouse, Mark Henderson approached Corinne in the parking lot. "The insurance will cover it," he said without preamble. "We'll have it processed within the week." Corinne nodded. She didn't look at him. "Derek is a good kid," Mark continued, and his voice had an edge now. "He made a mistake. He's learned from it. What do you want from us? Do you want him to be destroyed? Because I think you got what you wanted in there. You proved that the world is harsh and that consequences are real. You're welcome." He walked away before Corinne could respond. She stood in the parking lot for a long time, feeling the weight of victory that didn't feel like victory. She drove home. She didn't go inside the house. Instead, she went directly to the pool, which was now complete. The contractors had finished 2 days ago. The water was crystal clear, refilled, balanced, perfect. It looked exactly as it had before Derek Henderson dumped paint into it. Corinne sat in a lawn chair at the pool's edge and looked at the water. She tried to feel the satisfaction of restoration, of order returned, of the world brought back into proper alignment. Instead, she felt only tired. Derek was different after the trial, not in the way a person becomes hardened by experience, more in the way a person does when the weight of consequence has actually settled into their bones. He stopped playing baseball. He stopped hanging out with Lucas. He did his community service hours. He'd been sentenced to 40 hours for the vandalism itself, picking up trash in parks and painting over graffiti. His mother asked him once if he thought Mrs. Whitmore had been unfair. "No," Derek said. "I don't think so. I think she was sad and she didn't know how to be sad without making other people hurt too. I get it. I don't like it, but I get it." That observation, that simple, clear-eyed understanding from a 12-year-old, was what finally broke something open in Corinne. 3 weeks after the trial, she called Derek's house and asked to speak to him. Derek's mother, Linda, answered. There was a long silence when Corinne introduced herself. "I'd like to speak to Derek," Corinne said, "if that's appropriate." "I'll get him," Linda said, and her voice suggested she was very carefully not doing or saying anything that might be held against her later. Derek got on the phone. "Hello," his voice was small, uncertain. "Derek," Corinne said, and she had no plan for what came next. She was operating on instinct now, which was dangerous territory for a woman who'd built her life on the elimination of instinct. "I wanted to apologize." There was a silence. "For the trial," Corinne continued. "For pursuing the case the way I did. Judge Morales was right. I was trying to make you suffer to match my own suffering. That wasn't fair, and I'm sorry." "Are you going to drop the case?" Derek asked. "The case is concluded," Corinne said. "It's in the past now. What I wanted to ask is, would you be willing to come do some yard work for me? The pool area needs some maintenance, and I could use the help. I'd pay you, of course." Derek said yes so quickly it was clear he'd been waiting for some kind of path forward, some way to make this right that didn't involve money or lawyers, or the machinery of consequences. The following Saturday, Derek showed up at Corinne's house with his father's rake and shovel. He worked for 3 hours, clearing debris from around the pool deck, helping her reorganize the space. They didn't talk much. Conversation wasn't really necessary. When Derek was leaving, Corinne asked him a question that had been sitting in her mind since the trial. "Why did you dump the paint?" she asked. "What were you thinking?" Derek considered this. "I was thinking that it would be funny," he said finally. "I wasn't thinking about you at all. I was thinking about myself and Lucas and what made us laugh. That was my mistake. That was the actual mistake, not just dumping the paint, but not considering that there was a person attached to this pool, a person who cared about it." Corinne nodded. It wasn't absolution, it was just understanding. "Come back next Saturday," she said. "There's more work to do." Over the course of the summer, Derek became a fixture at Corinne's house. Every Saturday morning, he'd arrive with her father's tools, ready for whatever project Corinne had identified. Some of it was real work, maintaining the pool area, repainting the deck, fixing a section of fence that had rotted. Some of it was busy work, just ways for Corinne to give Derek legitimate reasons to be in her space. Her daughter Emma noticed first. "Why is Derek Henderson at our house all the time?" she asked one afternoon, watching Derek paint the pool house from her bedroom window. "He's working," Corinne said. "I'm paying him." "You're definitely not paying him enough for how often he's here," Emma said. "What's actually happening?" Corinne didn't have a clean answer. She was atoning, maybe. She was learning something about how to live in a world that wasn't entirely controllable. She was figuring out, very slowly, that a 12-year-old boy was not actually the enemy, even if his impulsive action had forced her to confront things she'd been avoiding. "I was unfair to him," Corinne said finally. "This is me trying to make that right." Emma absorbed this. At 16, she was at that age where judgment was swift and complicated by the fact that teenagers were capable of tremendous moral clarity while also being essentially amoral themselves. "That's weird," Emma said, "but okay, I guess it's better than yelling at people." Corinne started noticing things about Derek through that summer. She noticed that he was different from Emma, quieter, more thoughtful, less certain of his own correctness. She noticed that he had a specific way of approaching problems, trying to understand the structure before attempting to fix it. She noticed that he seemed younger in some ways than other 12-year-olds she encountered, and older in others. One Saturday, Derek asked her about the pool. "Why does it matter so much?" he asked. He was painting the fence, and they were on their 5th week of repairs. "It's nice and everything, but why did you care so much when I messed it up?" Corinne sat in her lawn chair, a different one than the one she'd sat in on the day of the trial, and considered the question. "After my husband and I got divorced," she said, "I felt like I didn't have control over anything. I moved to a new house, I renovated it. I got a good job, I built a life that was organized, predictable. The pool was part of that. It was proof that I could have something perfect if I worked hard enough." "But pools aren't perfect," Derek said. "No," Corinne agreed. "They're not. They require constant maintenance. They can be damaged, they can algae up, they can crack. They're actually fragile, which I didn't want to accept. So when I dumped the paint, it forced me to see that the illusion of control I'd constructed was just an illusion," Corinne said. "It wasn't your fault that you discovered this, but I blamed you for it because it was easier than blaming myself." Derek continued painting. The fence was nearly done. In another week or two, there would be no more repairs for him to do, no more reasons for him to be here on Saturday mornings. "What changed?" he asked. "The judge," Corinne said. "She was right. I was trying to make you suffer to match my own suffering, and that's not justice. That's just spreading pain around." "My mom said that too," Derek said. "She said you were hurt and didn't know how to fix it, so you tried to fix it by hurting back." Corinne felt something shift inside her. A mother's observation, reflected through a child, arriving at the exact place Corinne had been trying not to look. "Your mother sounds wise," Corinne said. "She is," Derek said. "She's just messier than you are." Corinne laughed. It was the first genuine laugh she'd had in months. The sound surprised her. She sat with it, letting it settle into her body. By the end of the summer, the house and pool were in the best condition they'd been since Corinne had bought the property. The fence was fresh. The deck was sealed. The pool equipment had been serviced and updated. Derek's last Saturday arrived with no ceremony, and neither of them mentioned that it would be his last. He showed up, and they worked on clearing out the pool's storage area. A job they'd been saving because it was one that would genuinely take just one Saturday, one final project. When they were done, Derek stood at the pool's edge, looking at the water the way Corinne had looked at it so many times. Clear, blue, perfect, and entirely temporary in its perfection. "Thank you," he said, "for letting me fix it." "Thank you," Corinne said, "for understanding what you broke." Derek nodded. He gathered his tools. Before he left, he turned back to her. "I'm not going to dump paint in any more pools," he said, and there was something almost funny about it, the way a 12-year-old would phrase such a vow. "I'm counting on that," Corinne said. When he'd gone, Corinne sat at the pool's edge and did something she'd never done before. She went swimming. The water was cold. It was shocking. It was alive in a way that standing at the pool's edge and admiring it never was. She floated on her back for a long time, looking up at the sky, feeling the weight of her body in the water. She thought about control and reconstruction, and the ways that breaking things sometimes had to happen before you could understand what they were actually for. Fall arrived, and with it came the sense that seasons could actually change, that time moved forward, that nothing remained static even if you tried very hard to make it so. Derek went into 8th grade. He stopped coming to Corinne's house, but not because she'd asked him to. He simply moved forward into his life the way children do, carrying the weight of the summer but not being crushed by it. He played baseball again. He went back to hanging out with Lucas, though something had shifted between them. Derek was less available for dares, less interested in chaos, more interested in understanding the mechanics of consequence. His coach noticed the change and called Mark Henderson to ask what had happened. "It's a long story," Mark said. "But basically Derek did something stupid. A woman sued us, we lost, and then Derek worked it off by doing yard work all summer. It sounds worse than it was, but it was," clarifying for him. Corinne didn't see Derek until November, which was coincidental and also inevitable. It was at the supermarket, and he was with his mother, pushing the cart while Linda made her chaotic way through the store, grabbing items without consulting a list. Derek saw Corinne first. He waved. His mother turned and recognized her, and something flickered across Linda's face, something between appreciation and wariness. "Mrs. Whitmore," Linda said, and her tone was genuinely warm. "Derek speaks very highly of his experience working at your house." "He was excellent to work with," Corinne said, and meant it. "He's a thoughtful person." "He is," Linda said. "He's also still 12, so he'll probably do something stupid again at some point. That's just the age. But I think this taught him something about being stupid with intention versus being stupid because you didn't think." Corinne smiled at this. It was a distinction Linda was right to make. "How's the pool?" Derek asked. "Perfect," Corinne said. "I actually use it now." They talked for a few more minutes and then they parted ways. Derek and his mother continued their shopping and Corinne continued hers. It was an ordinary moment, the kind that happened 10,000 times a day in supermarkets and parking lots across America, but it was also something else. It was the moment when a story was fully concluded, when the transformation was complete. Winter came, and with it came something Corinne hadn't anticipated, the desire to see other people. She started going to a book club. She accepted a dinner invitation from a colleague. She joined a community pool league, an irony she appreciated, which meant driving twice a week to the municipal pool and spending 2 hours in the company of other adults who'd organized their lives around volleyball in water. One evening, after a particularly close match, one of the league members asked her why she joined. "I used to be obsessed with control," Corinne said, "with making sure everything was perfect, and then something happened that showed me the futility of that approach. So now I'm trying to spend more time doing things that are chaotic and fun and involve water and other people." The woman, whose name was Rebecca and who worked in marketing, laughed. "That's a great origin story for someone trying to be interesting at parties," she said, "but I feel like there's a real story there." And Corinne told her. She told her about Derek and the paint and the lawsuit and the summer of repairs. She told her about what Judge Morales had said and what Linda Henderson had implied and what Derek's small observation had illuminated. Rebecca listened with the kind of careful attention that suggested she understood this wasn't just anecdote. It was the shape of someone's transformation. "So what do you do now?" Rebecca asked. "Just like, except that things fall apart." "No," Corinne said, and she was surprised by the clarity of her answer. "I maintain things, but I don't expect perfection. I try to understand what things are actually for, and I attempt to recognize when I'm hurting people to avoid dealing with my own hurt." "That's very healthy," Rebecca said. "I should write that down. I'm definitely hurting someone right now to avoid dealing with my own hurt." "Who?" Corinne asked. "My ex-husband," Rebecca said. "Very specifically, his new girlfriend. I'm constructing this entire narrative where she's the villain, but really I'm just mad that the life I'd imagined didn't work out." Corinne recognized herself in that description so completely that it was almost startling. How many versions of herself existed in other women? How many of them were sitting in their own versions of court, trying to sue their way to peace? "You could probably fix that," Corinne said gently, "before it becomes an actual lawsuit." Rebecca laughed. "I'll try," she said, "though I probably won't. Anger is easier than sadness." Corinne knew that was true. On what would have been Derek's 13th birthday, Corinne found herself thinking about him. She didn't know when his birthday was, they'd never discussed it. But autumn had turned to winter, and mathematically he was likely a year older now. She wondered if he ever thought about that summer, if he ever drove past her house and remembered painting the fence and clearing out the storage shed. She sent a card to his house, not for his birthday, which she didn't know, but just a note. It was simple. "Thank you for coming back that Saturday. It mattered more than you probably understand." Mark Henderson called her a week later. "Derek got your card," he said. "He wanted me to make sure you knew that he did. He didn't know what to do with it, but he wanted me to tell you." "Does he ever talk about that summer?" Corinne asked. "Sometimes," Mark said. "Usually when he's done something he knows is a bad idea, but he's about to do it anyway, he'll think about your pool and he'll stop. So I'd say you made an impact." After they hung up, Corinne went to the pool. It was December now. The water was cold enough that no one would want to swim in it. She sat at the edge with her feet dangling in the water, which was exactly what you're not supposed to do if you're trying to maintain perfect pool conditions. She pulled her feet out and dried them on her pants. The pool would freeze over probably. The winter would come. The The ice would cover it, and in the spring it would thaw and the water would still be there. That was the thing about water, it transformed but it remained. It could be drained and refilled. It could be damaged and restored. It could be destroyed and rebuilt. But the essential nature of it, the wetness of it, the way it moved and flowed and eventually found its own level regardless of your efforts to control it, that remained. Corinne left the house and drove to the municipal pool where her league was having a practice. She arrived early and swam laps in the deep end, moving her body through the water in simple, repetitive motions. No perfection, no control, just the physical fact of water and movement and the body moving through space. When she got home that evening, she stood at her kitchen window and looked at her pool. It was dark now. She could barely see it, just the outline and reflection of the moon. She thought about what it represented, not perfect order, but the attempt at order. The knowing that order was impossible and necessary, that breaking and rebuilding were part of the same process, that a child and a woman could both be exactly what they were in a moment, and it would ripple forward in ways neither of them could predict. She thought about Derek, who was growing up now into a person shaped partially by paint in a pool, and the consequences that followed. She thought about what she'd learned about herself, that hurting people and hurting yourself were often the same thing, and that forgiveness wasn't something that came from external structures like lawsuits or settlements. It came from the inside, from the specific moment when you stopped trying to prove something and just tried to live. The pool would need cleaning tomorrow, the filters would need attention, the chemicals would need testing. None of it would stay perfect, all of it would require her attention, and that was fine, that was actually the whole point. Corinne turned away from the window and went upstairs to sleep. Tomorrow she would call Rebecca and apologize for avoiding her calls. Tomorrow she would send Linda Henderson a recipe she'd found that she thought Linda might like. Tomorrow she would begin the process of being a different person than the one who'd written out that lawsuit and sat in the courthouse waiting to prove that consequences were real. But tonight she slept, and the pool stayed still, and the neighborhood stayed quiet, and a woman who'd learned how to break finally learned how to rebuild not just things, but herself.